talk for a little bit about the current state of affairs with respect to our presidential candidates as they're lined up so far. I've just watched a couple of videos this evening, which I actually hadn't intended to do, but that have changed my mind a little bit or given me something else to think about. And so, what I'm going to do is try to quickly run through a list of the presidential candidates as they stand right now. I'm taking this list from CBS News and their posting as of April 25th. So let me go ahead and pull that up and just scroll through the list and just make some quick comments on some of these candidates and then come back later with some extended comments on some of the particular candidates and individuals. So the current front runner, I guess, would be President Biden, as he has announced a couple of days ago that he is officially running for election in 2024. And now my take on Biden's presidency and policies thus far is that I'm not in favor of much of what he's done, if much of anything of what he's done. And I'm going to come out later with a list of things, the detail why I think things should have been done differently than what President Biden has done in providing leadership over the last couple of years. And I do not anticipate positive leadership from him over the next couple of years based on what I've heard and what he's been talking about. Particularly troublesome, I think, is that Vice President Kamala Harris has not demonstrated, from my perspective, any indication that she's ready to serve as Vice President, let alone as President of the United States. So it appears to me, and I've seen a couple articles today that suggest the same thing, and there's been a lot of discussion over the last several months, that she may be more of a negative than a positive with his plans to go forward and run in 2024. So President Biden, the leading Democrat, and the way things are set up right now, the only real option Democrats have if they don't proceed with any kind of a primary for the other candidates that have announced or might announce over the coming months. The next person listed here in this report is President Trump. And I've put out a video previously. It's rather lengthy. I need to actually redo it where I list the pros and cons from my perspective for President Trump. And nothing has really changed with respect to what I think about whether or not President Trump should run again. And he is not my first choice. I do not think, and I think there's a lot of polling to indicate the country does not think, that a President Trump versus President Biden presidential competition, race, whatever it is you want to call it, an election with President Trump and President Biden in 2024 is what we're looking for. I do think that for President Biden, there are certain issues with respect to how strong he is, how capable he is of even finishing out this term, let alone a second term. Donald Trump seems to have a lot of energy and a lot of those factors that make Trump still going for him. So the degree to which he also is older as a candidate, I don't think suggests that he would be impacted by those issues in the way that President Biden already is being impacted by those issues. And I would suggest I gave signs of that even in the election for 2020. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Trump here. I'll talk about him more later and put out a more succinct summary of why I don't think, at least at this point, that President Trump is the best option. Nikki Haley, when she first appeared on the scene a few years ago, several years ago now, I guess, I was impressed with many of the things that she said and did. But as I have become much less hawkish about foreign policy and the United States military and what we've done, and I've mentioned that in a few different videos, I'm going to come out with a couple more that specifically address my concerns about the U.S. and her use of military power and might in the world, and both over the last 50 years and today. Nikki Haley represents a position, particularly with respect to the military and foreign intervention, that I'm basically no longer in favor of. And so that's about all I have to say on Nikki Haley right now. Vivek Ramaswamy, I did watch a video tonight, an interview of him on Reason TV, and I'll provide a link to that in the commentary, the intro. But I'm impressed with Vivek Ramaswamy and what he brings to the table. Didn't know really anything about him. I'd heard a couple of comments from him in the past on different topics. Subsequent to his declaring for candidacy for the Republican nominee for president, I've seen a couple of short interviews, but the interview with Reason was about an hour long. I found it very interesting, both Vivek and his ideas, how he handles himself, his breadth of knowledge on different subjects, and just what he brings to the table. I think it's going to be a much more interesting candidacy from him than I expected. Larry Elder, appreciate the work that Larry Elder does and with his radio show, and what a little bit I've had opportunity to watch that and listen to what he has to say. But I'm not necessarily convinced that now is the time for Larry Elder, given other players on the field. This article notes a strong showing. I believe it was this article. Yes, notes a strong showing in the recall for Governor Gavin Newsom, which certainly boosted Larry Elder's profile on the national scene. But it'll be interesting to see if he can put together a serious challenge to those who are considered leading contenders for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. Asa Hutchinson, or Asa, I apologize, not knowing for sure how to say that. I know I've heard it several times. I believe it's Asa Hutchinson, actually. Frankly, while I don't think that age is an automatic disqualifier, I think that there's been a lot of legitimate concern about the fact that America is being governed not just with respect to presidential leadership and contenders, but even throughout the upper echelons of government, the House, the Senate, and many positions of power by an aged population of leaders, with some serving more effectively than others in their advanced years. And so I think that's kind of a negative that Governor Hutchinson is going to have to deal with. Is he going to appear more like President Biden, or is he going to appear more like President Trump as he launches his campaign and gets his name out there? He is a few years younger than both Biden and Trump. 72, I believe, is what I saw was his age. Yeah, 72. And I don't honestly know a whole lot about him, so name recognition may be one of his main issues going forward. And then Marianne Williamson, the 2024 Democratic presidential candidates. Marianne Williamson ran in 2020, got some name recognition. The last poll I heard, she was 5% on the Democratic selection for president if the vote were cast today. I think she brings some interesting ideas to the table, but I've just never been myself impressed that her overall approach to governance is what we need in the context of the president. So while I think she has some interesting ideas and some perspectives on life, the universe, and everything, I'm not sure that she brings much to the table as far as being a strong presidential candidate. RFK Jr. Didn't really know anything about him at all until recently. He's another one. I watched an interview with Kim Iverson. I'll put a link there. And I saw an interview with him the other day. I can't remember and couldn't find before I recorded this exactly which talk show he was on. But he also has impressed me with some of his ideas, how he approaches things, his history. I've tried to look a little bit into his anti-vax issues, and that seems to be the main albatross around his neck from all the response to him following his announcement, and have not been able to find much other than some reference to him leading kind of an anti-vax perspective with respect to COVID. So I need more information on that. But frankly, if anti-vax is his um, biggest handicap, being an anti-vaxxer, there are a lot of positions that he outlined in his discussion with Kim Iverson and some other contexts that I've seen that struck me as very interesting. In fact, Vivek Ramaswamy and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Might together present a formidable ticket. Again, I don't know enough about either their, both of their positions to know if that's even something to consider. But those are the two, Ramaswamy and Kennedy Jr., who have impressed me more so far than I think I expected. And admittedly, I knew very little about either of them until over the last couple of weeks. One thing I will mention about this is I was looking at some articles, and I want to pull up here if I can. Aaron Blake in the Washington Post on the 25th wrote an article about the top 10 Democratic 2024 presidential candidates besides Biden, ranked in the order he sees them as providing a legitimate option to Biden should Biden ultimately not run. And he presents this with the opening line, at long last, we have a major candidate in the 2024 Democratic presidential primary, referencing President Biden. And then he lists some of the things that are going against Biden ultimately succeeding should he have any legitimate contenders. And again, the way the Democrats have set things up, as I understand it so far, there will be no debates. So everything is being done to just move Biden into the role of official nominee for the Democrats for the 2024 election. Now, Blake goes through a list of candidates, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on these. Some of these, I don't necessarily think they offer too many legit reasons to consider them. Warnock, I skipped Phil Murphy and J.B. Pritzker, a couple of rich Democrat governors, Illinois, New Jersey. And not sure that they necessarily have any governing framework or any governing accomplishments to lend them any credibility should they jump onto the national stage. I know a little more about Pritzker than I do Murphy, a little more about Illinois than I do New Jersey. So I'd have to look into that a lot more should we come around to that. Raphael Warnock, he won 2 votes, 2 elections, and I think both of those victories are because one of my major criticisms of President Trump is that Trump did not do what Trump should have done as leader of the Republican Party to ensure that Republicans won the Senate seats in Georgia. And so I think Warnock, in part, won because of the poor work of President Trump in the first election that he won in 2020, and then the poor work that the Republicans did in providing a challenger to Warnock in 2022. I was more impressed than I expected to be with Herschel Walker's effort and many of the things that he said, but I don't think that he was a particularly strong candidate in what was a potentially winnable election. And I don't see why Warnock is on the list. Bernie Sanders, frankly, I don't agree with much of Bernie's policy positions. I think he has reached a point where age is a very real consideration. And that's one of the things that I think will need to be addressed. And I meant to mention when I was talking about Biden, there's a video that just came out on counterpoint or breaking points. I believe that's the show, but anyway, I'm going to list that. Very good analysis of the age issue as a strictly objective look at age odds of passing away or being incapacitated and how they go up as you get older. I want to get that out. Let me see if I actually have that handy. But anyway, I want to get that out as well. I'll include that in the list of references that I put in the opening paragraph. Do not know much about Amy. I know I've heard her name a lot, but now I'm stumbling over how to say it. Well, I'm not even going to try. Amy, the Minnesota Senator. I will try. Amy Klobuchar. I apologize for not having that pronunciation down. I know I've heard her name a lot. Josh Shapiro. I do not know anything about Josh Shapiro. So they both, I think, have some name recognition issues. Although I think Amy, again, I apologize, drawing a blank on how to pronounce her name, Klobuchar, would have some more prominent policy positions as a senator. That would, if I saw those, would remind me what I think about her positions. Gavin Newsom, frankly, I don't understand, given California's condition, how Gavin Newsom is even seen as a potential presidential candidate. Don't see what there is that's being done in California that we want replicated on the national scene. Gretchen Whitmer, not sure. She brings a lot to the table, despite what all has been going on up there, and we'll see how things move. But not sure that Michigan is in such a strong position that Gretchen Whitmer brings much to the table on the national scene. Jared Polis, never heard of him, so we'll have to see more about him to have any idea. Kamala Harris, again, do not think that she is a strong candidate at all. Did not think she was a strong addition to President Biden's ticket when he brought her in as vice president. Do not think that she brings any comfort to the majority of the U.S. or the world should she be in a position to assume the presidency. Do not think that she would have any chance at all if she were to run for president. So do not know why she is listed as number 2 here, other than as vice president, she would be the presumed banner carrier if Biden didn't run, but he is running, so now she's faced with serving, if he wins, as vice president for another 4 years, when by all appearances she's been totally frustrated with the opportunity she'd be given to date in his presidency, and I'll have more to say on that in a different context. And then Mayor Pete Buttigieg, apologize again for stumbling over that name. Only heard it 1,000 times or more. Do not think there's anything that he brings to the table as far as policies or accomplishments that makes him a legitimate contender. So not on this list until others worth mentioning at the very end are Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson, the only 2 Democrats who have already declared themselves as candidates for the Democratic nomination. The degree to which the DNC is already determined or is claiming that they're not going to hold any debates, it's difficult to see how they're going to gain any traction or have a chance to be considered. We just looked at them in the CBS article that we'll go back to in just a second. But want to go over Aaron Blake 2 days later, today, came out with an article on why he doesn't think that Kennedy, who is polling at 19% in some polls, is really a legitimate challenge to Biden from the perspective of Democrats, and why he is seen, as Blake presents it here, as simply a tool for Republicans, or a tool Republicans hope will be used to damage Biden in the context of a Democratic primary. Again, the only thing that they seem to be focusing on with Robert Kennedy Jr. is the anti-vax history that he has. I need a fuller picture of what that's all about to better understand why that should be a deciding factor, because many of the positions that he's outlined that I've heard sound fairly reasonable to me. So anyway, just wanted to bring those articles and ideas up. Going back to this article, and I have up here the video I meant to bring up earlier. So here we have this Biden's insanely high chance of death if reelected, breaking points, where Sagar talks about that, and I want to include that link in the description here when I post this video. But very interesting because he's going to actuarial tables and talking about just the nuts and bolts of what happens to us, the odds of things happening to us as we age, and the implications when the person you're talking about is the leader of the free world. So going back to the list here, just a couple others that are mentioned. Ron DeSantis. There were a lot of things that I appreciate about what Ron DeSantis has done, but I've come to a point where right now he hasn't declared, so he's a potential declarer of candidacy. But frankly, I'm beginning to think that he is using the power of government too much, even if much of what he does I agree with. I think there's too much overreach and not enough democracy in the way certain things are being handled. And I've talked about that. We'll talk about that more elsewhere. So I'm not as keen on DeSantis as I thought I would be as a kind of a Trump without the baggage. I think DeSantis is accruing even more baggage as time goes on, particularly in this battle with Disney and the colleges and just how he's handling certain issues. Because there are a lot of things that I think ought to be, but I don't think they ought to be engraved in law. And so more on that later. Mike Pence, frankly, I think he was damaged by serving as President Trump's vice president. Appreciate some of the things he did as vice president. Appreciate his leadership and his position on many of the issues, particularly the social issues. But I'm not convinced that Mike Pence really in the long run is a viable candidate for the Republican nomination, but open to being corrected on that. Tim Scott, I've been very impressed with what I've seen as he represents positions in the Senate and different things that I've heard. Do not know that I know enough about him to know if I think he would be a strong candidate or not. I think he's launched an exploratory committee. But I kind of wonder if some more time in the Senate would not be beneficial for him to establish more of an identity, a name going forward. And so then after that, Chris Sununu is mentioned. I really don't know much about Chris Sununu, governor of New Hampshire, so don't have really anything to say. And then who's definitely not running on this list. Not interested in going through that. So anyway, took a little bit longer than I intended, but here are my thoughts, as you've seen, on the different candidates that have announced, Democrat and Republican, and how they are being looked at, my thoughts on their positions and where they're at. Look forward to hearing your comments on these ideas, these issues, the candidates as they presented themselves so far. And going forward, we'll get more into the particular issues by different candidates. And then also, I'd like to call your attention to a couple of other videos that you might be interested in, and would look forward to hearing your comments on those and comments about anything else that we might want to look at. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.